Battlefront, SouthGate. I am your host, Dustin Faulkner. You are here once again to be informed of the latest issues abroad and at home. As you know, that's why you come to us. We seek to expose all in the Christian world and all in the world living. Today is not any different. On Monday, the 25th, Officer Derek Chauvin held his knee to the neck of a subdued and handcuffed George Floyd, resulting in the slow suffocation of him. 3 other officers stood by as their colleague brutally murdered the perpetrator, who had the right to due process no matter the circumstances and crime he was alleged to commit. The video of this brutal murder quickly circulated, resulting in immediate protests and outcries of racism once again. However, it's not hard to see that this has been a brewing problem in Minneapolis and many other cities nationwide over the decades. The officer in question has a history of brutality, not exactly linked to racism. The case here is brutality, and that is the problem here. It is the culture of incompetence, narrative quotas, disqualified hires, and breeding cultures of overreaching police authoritarianism with brutality. Chauvin has 10 counts of this historically. One in 2006, where he responded with 6 other officers to a stabbing where Wayne Reyes was shot dead for allegedly pointing his shotgun at officers from his truck. Administrative leave there. Back on force. In 2006, he was also named with 7 other cops in a federal lawsuit by an inmate at Minnesota Correctional Facility. Another time in 2008, he and a partner entered a home on a domestic violence call where Ira Latrell Tolles was holed up in his bathroom. He tried to escape, but apparently also grabbed the officer's gun, resulting in 2 shots to the abdomen. He lived, and incidentally, during this time, Chauvin was awarded the Medal of Valor for his response. On another time in 2011, Leroy Martinez ran with a gun, but later dropped it with his hands up and was shot by Terry Nutter. Administrative leave for Chauvin there. One of the standby officers, Tu Tao, has a record in 2014 where he and his partner beat Lamar Ferguson, who was walking with a pregnant woman. He was handcuffed and beaten while losing teeth for an outstanding warrant and apparently resisting arrest after slipping out of the cuffs. A lawsuit was settled out of court for excessive force in 2017. Let us not forget the praised by Mayor Betsy Hodges poster child for Somali immigrant integration success story, MPD officer Mohammed Noor, who shot a dual Australian and U.S. citizen, Justine Damon, killing her in 2017. She called and then approached the police vehicle in pajamas. Noor aimed the gun over his partner and shot her in the abdomen. The reports by most media were downplayed as compared to many others, like this most recent, but Noor was a symptomatic problem. His trainer said he could not handle stress and had poor reading comprehension. More like all these cases where standards are lowered to enable the wrong kind of officers to be hired. Noor was convicted on lesser charges, which resulted in 12.5 years imprisonment. However, this case was pleaded that he didn't deserve it. There were peaceful protests during this. There never were any riots, unlike this one. Another cop issue hijacked by the wrong people, and it's widely defended as necessary. The current police chief is black. So, again, it's not a race issue, but it's been made into one. This is a large result of the social media campaigns, while others are censored, by the way. It is the result of leftist leadership in that state. Ilhan Omar goaded them. It's the leftist Democrats in the Green Party destruction who believe that the Democrats aren't radical enough. The anti-constitutionalists. Former Nation of Islam leader, racial hustler Keith Ellison, who was praised by leftist Governor Walz for his civil rights work, stood up by there, more or less promoting the racial tension. They threw their tool chief under the bus. They did not hardly discourage rioting or violence. Just wear your masks and stay 6 feet apart. Now we're here, and Minneapolis is laid in waste, destroyed by rioters who got involved with people who were rightfully discouraged and angry about the new authoritarian brutality. And so what we've done now is we have brought on Stewart Rhodes of Oath Keepers, Yale Law graduate, to tell us what he sees is going on and what the problem with Chauvin really is. How are you today, Stewart?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. What do you think is the problem here? Do you think that some constitutional rights have been violated of George Floyd?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, when this first happened, I immediately turned to my most experienced police officers and Oath Keepers. Some of them are board directors, like John Shirley, who was a 20-year Houston PD officer and is a current serving Hood County, Texas constable, and Rick Werder, who was a sheriff deputy in Indiana and is now also a sheriff deputy in Montana, who was a lethal force instructor, law enforcement instructor, and several other retired police officers who have been academy instructors. And they watched the video and they saw the same thing I saw. I mean, I based my opinion based on my jiu-jitsu experience and training, much like one of the bystanders who was a jiu-jitsu practitioner who said, pointed out that the police are cutting off his ability to breathe and also by having their knee on his neck, cutting off his blood. But our police officers looked at that and they said, well, they're all taught not to leave a suspect on their stomach or their stomach and chest for extended period of times. That's called positional asphyxiation. A person is very difficult to breathe in that position. Add to that a knee in the back and on the neck, and you got a combination of the knee in the back keeps the diaphragm from being able to operate and the person being able to breathe. That alone can do it, but then you also compound that with his knee, the officer's knee being on Mr. Floyd's neck and his knee and shin, cutting off the carotid artery, and the other side of his neck is pressed against the concrete. So both those things could have cut off his ability to process oxygen to the blood being cut off by his knee and his shin, and the ability to breathe and bringing oxygen into the body through the knee on his back. And it wasn't like this is fine when you're arresting somebody, but once the person's in cuffs, it's not standard protocol to leave them on their stomach, let alone kneel on them for what was it, at least 8 minutes, 8-9 minutes and counting. I'm not even sure how much longer he was down like that before the video started. It's a 10-minute long video. And only at the very end, after another police officer walks by and checks his pulse, does nothing to stop Chauvin from keeping his position, and then they go get a stretcher, and then they let him on a stretcher. And but the entire time, you've got bystanders. In fact, one of the bystanders, a female, she said she's a paramedic or an EMT, one of the two. She's an EMT at the local fire department, and she's pleading with them to check his pulse or let her check his pulse. And then you got a black man standing there, a bystander, who said that he trains jiu-jitsu at the local academy, and you can tell the guy is unable to breathe, and then he goes unresponsive. And anybody who has any kind of training can tell when someone's knocked out, when they're unconscious and unresponsive. And then Mr. Floyd urinates, and there's a puddle of urine flowing from his body. It's disgusting and disturbing. And no police officer I've talked to yet inside of Oath Keepers has defended anything that was done. It's not according to their training. They're all trained to do something different than what they did. They're trained to lay someone on their side If the guy is trying to get back up, you're concerned he could be getting back up, then you shackle his feet or bind his feet with a strap, and then you lay him on his side or you prop him up in a sitting position, much like he was initially propped up in a sitting position against the building. From an earlier video, you can see him sitting against the building. So they know how to do it right. They intentionally chose to do it wrong, and all the officers around the kneeler, I guess you can call him, all the other officers failed in their duty to stop him from doing that. They should have stopped him.
Yeah, I find that very curious because you have these three other officers, and one of them's a pretty big guy. He was actually standing the whole time. Like I'll have to go back and look at it, but if I'm not mistaken, from photos that I've seen, this man was actually standing in a position where he could have knocked Chauvin off, where he could have made him stop, grab him, pull him off of this man who was pleading that he couldn't breathe, pleading for his life. And now I got a question that, because we've seen this thing happening, and what do you think, Stewart, is the issue with other officers, partners, that are not stopping their fellow officers when they are clearly overreaching and when they are clearly hurting somebody outside the means of subduing them properly?
Well, before we talk about that, I want to stress something. There has not been a coroner's inquest completed yet. So, it's like prima facie evidence that what they were doing was unlawful, not according to their training standards. But the one thin fig leaf they have is, well, they haven't actually determined the cause of death. So there's always still that. But you don't need to know whether or not the officer's actions actually killed him to know that what he did was wrong. So I think to me, it's obviously a homicide. And most of our police officers agree, but there were at least one that said, hey, we have to wait for the coroner's inquest. Fair enough, but here's the problem. A lot of people don't trust coroner's inquests. They know that a lot of times the coroner is politicized and pressured from within the department to exonerate police officers. So that's one of the problems we have in this community, right in this country, and it goes to the prosecutor also. Just a little while ago, we watched video of a prosecutor talking about the case, saying that he's not going to talk about the case. They're not talking about the case. And saying there's evidence that he's seen that would exonerate the officer. That is a foolish thing to do. All he's going to do is inflame that community and possibly light fires around the country. So I just want to make that clear that he should keep his mouth shut and go through all the evidence. But here's the thing: we're looking at a video where the man goes unresponsive, and they continue to hold the position for minutes after he's gone non-responsive. So it'd be like me holding a choke on someone in jiu-jitsu, like a rear naked choke, for example. And then once the person goes limp, I just continue to hold the choke. I know what's going to happen. They're going to die. You cut off blood to the brain for that long, odds are the person's going to die. It's going to stop. The brain's going to stop functioning, and then the heart's going to fail, and off they go. They will be dead. Same thing here. He goes limp. He goes non-responsive. The officer continues to hold the position, cutting off his blood on his neck and continuing to press on his back, preventing him from being able to respirate. So that to us is like, that's already so wildly outside of their training that is, if not manslaughter, at least aggravated assault and an attempt to kill. So, but I mean, the odds are 98% positive that that's why he died. I mean, come on. So that's where we're at. So your question is why are police officers standing around and not doing anything? Well, it goes back to what Frank Serpico said. There was a 2014 article I encourage you to look up by the famous New York detective, Frank Serpico, who had blown the whistle on corrupt police officers in New York City. And because of that, they attempted to kill him. There was a movie made with Al Pacino in about him. And then after that, he was blackballed and ostracized from the police community. So a good cop standing up against bad cops is now persona non grata to all of the NYPD. He's just got a blackball. And what he said in that article is that only when the bad cops fear the good cops will we have meaningful change. And we're not there yet, is what he said. And I think he's right. There's a culture. I know some very good cops, some of them right here in my organization. that will do the right thing and have done the right thing. In fact, one of them I was talking to, Greg McWhorter, said that he has on many occasions, pushed people off of suspects and said, "I got it," because he knows the guy's too angry and is no longer, using reasonable force. And so he's taken over and made sure the person was safe. And he's done that. And lots of cops do that. And you don't hear about those instances. So they do happen. But there is this pattern and this tendency in law enforcement to circle the wagons and to defend the actions of fellow officers, no matter how unlawful and unconstitutional. And there's just that reality. There's that pressure to do that and go along and get along. And the officers that do stand up oftentimes pay the price. Like Greg Anderson there in Washington State, the Port Authority police officer who did the video calling out other officers for their violations of people's rights in response to COVID-19 shutdown orders that are unconstitutional, and he encouraged them to stop doing that. He was fired. So this is the pattern. Pattern is, if you're a good cop, if you keep your mouth shut, don't say anything, you keep your job. If you speak out against any actions by police, whether it's because you believe that they're blatantly criminal, like we're seeing right there on camera, or that you believe that what they're doing is unconstitutional, violating people's rights, either way, the tendency is that you're going to get punished. So that's the culture in police departments. And I think that's the dominant culture. I'm not a cop, so take that with a grain of salt, but that's my impression of that culture. And perhaps you can get one of our police officers to come on the show to more elaborate. But right now, I've got them writing up their analysis of this incident, and we'll be publishing that either later tonight or first thing tomorrow morning. So I encourage folks to go check out our website, oathkeepers.org, where we're going to publish their analysis.
Okay, well, we're up on a break, so we're going to go ahead and go into a break very quick, everyone. And when we come back, we're going to dive into this deeper about the issue of the police brutality and overreach. And then we're going to also dive into the issue of what may be possibly going on with what we're seeing there in Minneapolis in another similar occurrence in the past. This is Battlefront SouthGate.
It's a violation of my ethics to talk and evaluate evidence before we announce our charging decision, and I will not do that. I will say this, that video is graphic and horrific and terrible, and no person should do that. But my job in the end is to prove that he violated a criminal statute, and there is other evidence that does not support a criminal charge. We need to wade through all of that evidence and to come through with a meaningful determination, and we are doing that to the best of our ability.
And you are back at the Southgate. I am your host, Dustin Faulkner, and we are with Stewart Rhodes, again from Oath Keepers, and we are discussing the issue in Minneapolis with the 4 officers who committed a crime that resulted in the murder of somebody they were arresting. But before we go there, let's go ahead and let you guys know, again, you know that we have our book out, Social Injustice. It is 12 authors who are exposing the false gospel of social justice in the church and letting you know why that movement is not good for the church and why it is not good for the nation. And it ties in to a lot of what we're going to be talking about here in the next segment. You can go on to gatekeepersonline.com and you can use the code Dustin, D-U-S-T-I-N, and you will get 10% to 20% off of everything that is inside the store with my code Dustin. Or if you want to purchase our book, Social Injustice, you can get it from me at Battlefront Broadcasting at Outlook.com. We'll do some discussion there. Get you this book for $20 plus shipping and handling, and I'll sign it personally to you. You guys are not going to find this much information in concise of a format as these 12 authors, including myself, who wrote on illegal immigration, in any book. This book is hot. You need to get this. This is something you need in your library to be referencing, and especially for all of you who are now homeschooling and hopefully continue to do so, I exhort you to. This is a good thing for you to have around. You need to have this book in your collection. And also, when you're there on the site, go ahead and check out Pastor Sam's book to be pre-ordered, 5 Steps to Kill a Nation. His new book, which will be due out very soon. You can pre-order that book there. And I'm going to tell you, you know Pastor Sam, that bro right there, he tears it up, doesn't he? He knows the Constitution very well. He tells you everything you need to do, everything you need to know with the Monuments podcast. It's awesome. Don't miss that. And now we're going back to Stewart Rhodes. And here's something that I discovered, and I just want to mention this real quick. And that is that, you know, how you mentioned in the last segment about the video that's out of where he had that press conference, the Hennepin County attorney, Mike Freeman, who stupidly said that he wasn't going to reveal any information, and then threw him the bone of what they were going to do, that he may not have, that he should be exonerated. And we all know that no matter what, if on camera, whatever, he still has to go to trial. That's our constitutionally protected right of due process. But
what he said was, he said that it's unethical for him to discuss evidence before he makes his charging decision, whether to charge or not. But then he goes ahead and discusses the evidence by saying that there's evidence that does not support a criminal charge. So he just did what he said he shouldn't do. He talked about the evidence. It was a disaster. He should have just kept his mouth shut. He should have just said, I'm going to do this right. I'm going to look at all the evidence before I make a decision whether to charge or not, and I have no further comment. That's what he should have done. What he just did is he signaled everyone that there's a good chance that he may not charge this officer, and he's making that, he's kind of like letting people know that that's how this might go. And all that's going to lead to is more violence and more looting and more arson. It's really a very irresponsible thing for him to do.
Well, I agree with that. And here's something that I was thinking, because it seems like, and this is, you know, based on some of the research, I've heard this from also other experts talking about how these people, these district attorneys, these prosecutors, that they purposefully overcharge the cops so that they know that they will not be prosecuted, that they know that they can't get that conviction by the overcharge, right? They overcharge them with something and they can't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt in the court of law, and it causes the officer to ultimately, either the case is thrown out or they're found not guilty. And then you have the constituents in those areas, they hear that about how this, they're really going to tear this person apart. He's getting everything he deserves. They're going to really give him the strongest charge that they have. And then they don't understand that they're actually taking care of their good old boy club in that area, protecting their circle of trust by giving them that charge so that they will not achieve the conviction. And
they can always find him guilty of a lesser offense. You know, if he's being charged, for example, with murder in the first degree, it could go down to manslaughter. It can go down to aggravated manslaughter or negligent manslaughter. There's all. I mean, I'm not an expert in New York law or how their statutes read. I have to look at the statutes, but there's always the chance of being convicted of a lesser offense. So that's what should happen. So, but that's, like you said, that's not always what happens. Here's the reality. I was a criminal defense attorney in small town Montana for a couple of years. I've seen it in person. Police and the prosecutors work together all the time, and the prosecutors have a bias. in favor of the police. And that's why there probably should be a special prosecutor brought in from the outside, to be blunt. And that's what the state should be doing, is making sure that there's a unbiased prosecutor. Because when you got the same repeat player, a local DA or district attorney who is always dealing with the police and they're always working together to get convictions of people, you really can't expect him to be unbiased or a zealous advocate for a prosecution of one of those police officers. That's really not realistic. He should be, but the reality is most of the time they're not. They side with their buddies who are in the police department because they all see themselves as being on the same team. In fact, when I was a criminal defense attorney, I even had one prosecutor come right out and tell me that I worked for the devil because I was protecting a client's right to a fair trial. That's how they see things, that the criminal defense attorneys are all working for the devil by defending people's rights. That's their perspective, and they just want to prosecute and put people in jail. And they have political aspirations. They want a high conviction count, unless it's a police officer in front of them. Then it switches the other way. Everybody else, they go after you like you wouldn't believe. They'll go after you and throw the book at you. But when it's a police officer, when it's one of their own, that's how they see things. It flips the other way. That's just the way it is.
Well, that's actually pretty terrifying, to be quite honest with you. And,
I mean, he does have his right to a fair trial. And back again, he has a right, same due process rights everyone else does. But I'm just letting you know that's the bias I have seen in prosecutors, that they will flip their bias the other way when it's a police officer. The bias is towards charging and convicting and doing all they can to get the conviction. And there have been cases where men who were exonerated by DNA evidence that was swept under the rug and they were convicted because they wanted to get their man. They all decided he was guilty and off he went. And only later is it proved that they framed basically an innocent man. That's happened over and over again. But when it's with the police officers, it's almost always the exact opposite.
Incredible. So that brings us to another issue. And we know that there were people out there peacefully protesting because they were rightfully upset and angry at the brutality they had witnessed of a man dying before their eyes, and about how they feel like they're not being heard or across the country. As we were talking about, how we talked about in our last program together, that the police overreach regarding this coronavirus, regarding COVID-19. And so they go there and they protest that rightfully, but then it seemed to take a turn for the worst. And as I've been watching this and listening and hearing the players, especially as I said in my monologue earlier about the extreme leftists there, which have completely they're very, very close to having destroyed Minnesota. And so I believe now what we've witnessed as we saw our fellow countrymen in Minnesota have their businesses ransacked and demolished and fire set ablaze. And like the poor lady that was there at AutoZone, I believe it was, she was in the doorway and these people were pushing through her and she started defending herself with a knife, stabbing these people. And so they attacked her. This is a woman in a wheelchair. And they attacked her and then hit her. They turned a fire extinguisher on her, which can smother and kill somebody, by the way, because it cuts off the oxygen. But as we're seeing this rightful protest be hijacked, it seems to be eerily similar to what we saw in Ferguson. And your organization, Oath Keepers, actually was there protecting the business owners at this point. From your perspective, as you're watching this happen, as little Somalia is destroying everything over there, you have people coming in and then riling up other protesters and residents, Molotov cocktails. Do you see something happening here as it's turning into a whole new movement and narrative?
Well, in Ferguson, we were told by the locals that the people who were setting the fires, the arsonists, were not from Ferguson. They were outsiders. And in fact, many of them came from out of state, and they recognized nobody. We were there protecting. We started off protecting Natalie Cakes and More, which was owned by a local black resident, and then her neighbors. Next to her was an Oriental restaurant, and then a beauty supply store owned by Koreans, just multiracial, this whole block of buildings, and the apartments over the top of them. They had been threatened with being burned to the ground. Arsonists came by and threatened that. And so we were there to protect them. But all the locals told us these were people that were not from Ferguson. They were outsiders. And our guys witnessed white radical leftists who were running around in the streets and throwing Molotov cocktails and urging people to take part in looting and arson. So they weren't even from the local black community. They were outsiders. And so it's really no surprise. Radical leftists they're doing it right now. They're also coming into Minneapolis doing the same thing. Now, they have a right to come and protest. And we stood up for the rights of people in Ferguson or from outside. You have a right to go and protest peacefully. In fact, we sent a letter to the governor of Missouri strongly criticizing the response of the police, where they pointed sniper rifles at everybody in the crowd. They pepper sprayed everybody in the crowd, including journalists and peaceful protesters, and where that they had a curfew in place that we believe is a violation of the right of the people to peacefully assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. And so then our police officers wrote up their advice, which was that what they should do instead is send in undercover officers out into the crowds to identify the actual lawbreakers, those who are throwing bricks or Molotov cocktails, those who are committing real crimes, and then focus on them and send in, snatch teams or arrest teams to go and arrest the actual troublemakers, who were the minority in the crowd. Only a small number of people were doing these things. But that's not what happened. Instead, that they, like I said, they pepper sprayed everybody, and they had a gross overreaction that just all it did is fan the flames, and they angered people that they're having their right to protest violated. So it was a disaster. And then the governor deployed the National Guard, only deployed the National Guard to protect government buildings and then the more wealthy neighborhoods, and left the poorer neighborhoods to burn to the ground, which is why we stepped in. Our guys, a lot of our men were retired police officers or recent returning Afghan and Iraq veterans who stepped in and defended lives and property. So, and they weren't the only ones that did that. There were young black men in Ferguson who stood out in front of stores with shotguns and rifles. Just as you're now seeing in Minneapolis, same thing. You're seeing young people, young guys in the black community stepping up and doing the right thing and protecting businesses, which I think is great. But my message to the protesters is that you're going to have to police your own. Doesn't mean you're responsible for every dirtbag that throws a Molotov cocktail, but it does reflect on you. If you allow that behavior to go on and you don't try to stop it, all it's going to do is destroy whatever message you had about what the core issue here is what happened to George Floyd. It's not to go and burn down businesses because a communist hates capitalism, which is exactly what was going on in Ferguson. And I even had leftists attack us online, saying that we're there to protect property. I said, well, hey, we're protecting a black store owner. This is her livelihood. This is her ability to feed her family. They didn't care. She's a small business owner, and all they would say is, well, it was a small business owners who supported the Nazis and supported Hitler. So they don't give a damn about the small business owners. They don't care that it's not a big corporate chain, but it's a small bakery that they just didn't care. And it'll be the same thing here. These are radical communists who hate free businesses, free enterprise, including ones owned by local residents. They don't have any sympathy whatsoever for them. So that's the thing, as protesters who are protesting against police brutality have to be aware that they're going to have their intent hijacked and taken over by people who are radical anti-capitalists who want to destroy and burn down any business establishment. Don't be surprised if they try to push you to do that.
Right, and see, that's what we were talking about when the Hennepin County Attorney Matt Freeman just did that on the video, that now he's given more ammunition to some of those dissenters from peaceful protesting and possible infiltrators. Now, what's going to probably happen overnight tonight? I mean, the place is leveled, but how much more is this going to escalate? There's probably going to be a lot of, disappointed and angry people, but what about those who don't really care about this issue? It's just a reason to push their own narrative. What is anybody in that community going to be able to do when that really starts happening?
Well, they have to police their own. I think it's incredibly important. I mean, our message to Ferguson was that all of the veterans in Ferguson should have stood up and prevented the looting and the assaults. I mean, there were murders that happened during all that. And we said our message to them was that you should be stepping up and taking care of your own community. It should not require veterans from other parts of the country to come in there and do what you should be doing. Same thing in Minneapolis. I really, call on all the veterans in Minneapolis, step up right now, whether you're in the Black community or just in Minneapolis in general. Step up and do the right thing and stop the looting and stop. It does no one any good. All it does is destroy your message. It does Mr. Floyd's benefit to go and burn down stores that have nothing to do with the police, nothing to do with what's done to him. It does no one any good at all. All it does is hurt your cause and undermine it. It gives it a black eye. So they, like I said, they have to police their own. And, we're not going to just dive in there. We're looking at it. If it comes to the point where we're needed, we'll go do it. What we're hoping, though, is that the state police will step in and they'll bring outside agencies. That was the answer that our police officers had today when I asked them what should be done next. They said, well, the state police should step in, and other outside agencies who are not directly involved in this, in the black eye that department has. That department's lost all the trust of people around them entirely. And so I think that's what's going to happen next. And if that doesn't work, then the national guard will step in and keep the peace. But they have got to respect the rights of people to peacefully protest. And they've got to make sure that there's a distinction between those who are doing that and those who are committing crimes. And they can't lump them all in together. That's a disaster. That's what happened in Ferguson. And it did not help. So, but if it comes to it, we will be there if we have to step in and help protect lives and property. Absolutely. Because arson is worse. If you're burning down buildings, that could lead to someone's death. So that's a serious situation.
I agree with that. Well, we are going to come up on our second break, and then we'll come back into our third segment. And ladies and gentlemen, we have a surprise for you coming up in the third segment. So you don't want to go away too quickly, because we're going to have somebody that you're not expecting, and we want you to hear everything that's said because it's very important. This is Battlefront SouthGate. Welcome back to the final segment of Battlefront SouthGate. I am your host, still Dustin Faulkner, and we are with still Stewart Rhodes of Oath Keepers, and he has filled us in on the constitutionality of everything going on in Minneapolis and what has been going on regarding the protesters and how they need to police their own, and how they have the right to peacefully assemble and then protest their grievances against those they pay their taxes to, against their government officials when they know in their hearts something is not right. And so we have been doing that all over the nation, in Michigan, in California. There's been some in Tennessee. We've done some here, even in Texas, with the Texas Freedom Coalition, the Oath Keepers. Colonel Allen West was there at our last Austin protest, where we peacefully protested the unconstitutional shutdowns of our economy, our businesses, our private properties, where many people are also across the nation are being told that they have to wear masks and other issues that are going on. And people have been standing up across the nation and popping up, being strong and doing their duty. And tonight, we have someone with us who is going to make a stand somewhere where you're not expecting. And he is making a stand there in New York against Governor Cuomo. And he is going to peacefully open his business. Welcome to the program, Roberto Menuda, tattoo parlor owner, who is going to, in defiance of the orders of Governor Cuomo, open up his business this Saturday. Roberto, welcome to the program. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, glad to be here. Thanks for having me on. We're in New York, the epicenter of this virus now, partially directly, that flooded nursing homes with COVID-19 from direct orders from Cuomo. So they use this to extend shutdowns and use executive orders to a very abusive level. We all went along with the shutdowns initially because we want to help overwhelm the healthcare system, and that was projected 15 days. And this has just been an extreme violation of rights on an unbelievable level. Being from New York originally, I've been watching the erosion of our rights on so many different levels that at what point do you draw that line in the sand, So definitely reached that with this event that's going on and said, we're being our constitutional rights are being revoked. They're suspended entirely. And there's no end to the executive orders. There's no end to the shutdown. There's no projected date when they're going to let us reopen certain businesses. So I said it's my duty as an American to call out this corruption, to call this man the tyrant that he is, and forget finance, because there's not enough money in the world for me to give up my freedom. So I could have silently worked, which I was for a little while, but I said, you know what, no one in New York, millions of people, no one's going to take a stand to one of the most tyrannical leaders in this country. And I said, this is the least I can do to protect the rights that millions have died for to give us in this country. So I decided to go ahead and publicly announce that I am directly defying his executive orders. I stand in complete defiance. I'm even having what I consider a New York freedom rally to rally patriots, oath keepers, and anyone that's just a freedom-loving American to come and stand in solidarity. And hopefully we have the law enforcement upholding their oath that they took to the Constitution. I'm not going to break any laws by doing this. We're violating executive orders. And I have no problem dealing with the consequences that come along with it.
Well, I think that's a very patriotic thing that you're doing, because, down here we had Shelley Luther, who took a stand and did what she needed to do, because we had a lack of spinal fortitude from the men in this area. And, down here in Texas, we always talk about how everything's bigger in Texas, but it surely hasn't been testicles, has it? So, I think that what you're doing is great, because to me, it's extremely courageous, because you are going against somebody who's openly mocking you. He mocks your rights. He gets on there with his brother who says that he has the virus, and he's there being confronted by bikers when he's out violating the orders where he's supposed to stay home. He's out there spreading this virus, if he does have it, and while mocking you. And then you have this man who hoarded masks, who accused our president of doing nothing to help all of you, while shutting you down and telling you you can't make a living, you can't eat, you have to do what I say because I'm the one who knows what's better for you, while he's still living his life the way that he wants to live it and setting himself up probably for a presidential run, which is going to be a bad thing. And I think that you have making this stand, and everybody there in New York needs to stand not behind you, but with you. You need to be there on the front lines with Roberto, because he's going to need it. We don't know the outcome of what might happen here, but it might be a great outcome because of his leadership. What do you think, Stewart?
Well, yeah, I think all of our members that we're putting out a call to action right now, all of our members who are within driving range, if you're within 4 or 5 hours, drive there. And something you should know is that Roberto was in Virginia back on January 20th. We ran into each other in the streets. We were both there for the big, massive open carry protest against their tyrant governor, Governor Northam. And Roberto was there. He drove all the way from his home and drove 4 hours down to Virginia to stand up for the rights of Virginians. So I think you all deserve him the same turn. Now it's his turn in the hot seat to stand up for his rights against his, El Duce Cuomo there, the tyrant of New York, and we need to support him. So, spend a few hours driving on Saturday morning and be there at 9 o'clock in the morning or whenever you can get there. It'll be going all day long. Be there to support him and stand with him. And the more people that stand with him, the stronger his own community and more business owners that will step up. They'll see the support that he has. He's the tip of the spear. He's the tip of the iceberg. And what he's going to do that day is encourage all other New York business owners to defy Cuomo en masse. And we just heard that in New Jersey that's happening this next Monday on June 5th. 1,000 business owners are going to open up in defiance of their tyrant in New Jersey. And I want to stress that none of these governors are acting pursuant to any statute. There's no statute that delineates non-essential businesses from essential, that defines what that even means or delegates to the governor any authority to do that. This is something they made up entirely on their own out of whole cloth. And so it violates the core principle of Republican government that the legislature makes the law and the executive branch enforces it. And on top of that, it violates due process, protection of the laws, and our core fundamental rights to live our lives, the search of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And so, I think it's incredibly important to support those who step up and stand up. Like here in Texas, there was a business owner, I'm going to correct you earlier, it wasn't just Shelley Luther, there was also a gym owner here in Granbury, where I'm at right now, in Granbury, Texas, who stood up. Mr. Hebert, who's a former police officer from Louisiana, who opened his gym in defiance of the governor's order, and he was threatened with arrest by locals here, local authorities, and we showed up and defended him, and we were there. We opened his gym, and when the police didn't even show up, he was not arrested. Later, they did try to revoke his permit to have his business permit, but then the public outcry was so intense that they acquiesced and went back on that threat. And so he now has this open with no penalties, no threats whatsoever. So it's very important to support people. The more pressure you put on these politicians, like you said earlier, Cuomo's running for president. So he's looking at a big backlash from business owners and supporters in New York that what he's done has gone too far. That's all they really care about is whether it's going to hurt their political career. They don't really care about the Constitution. So, but hats off to Roberto for doing the right thing. We support him completely.
Exactly. Now, let me ask you a question, Roberto. You know that there's possible risk that this could turn sour. Let me help everybody to understand that in your mind and in your body and soul, what makes you still push forward to do this despite the uncertainty this could go the opposite direction?
I have two children. They're 4 and 6 years old. I have a wife, and I look at them and I know that their future is uncertain. Actually, it is pretty certain if we continue down this path, and it's very grim. And it's a future without freedoms. It's a future living under tyrannical dictatorship, and it's a future without a constitution. Because as of right now, all of the funding principles of this country are suspended, at least where I am. So knowing that, the only fear of consequence I have with an event like this is someone not acting appropriately that represents a patriotic movement. I don't have fear of arrest or fines or what may come down the line with the repercussions of what I'm doing. So it's for my children's future. It's for the freedom that, like I said, previously, that so many died to give us. That it's fundamentally the most important thing in my life to do this. This is definitely just not giving me any form of positive impact as far as finance or anything like that. but that takes back seat when it comes to the freedoms for myself and the future generations in this country.
I believe that that's extremely honorable, and I salute you for that. I am extremely appreciative, because with you doing this, you're not just representing the New York residents, the New York constituents. You're representing all of us. It's just the same as when you serve in the military. You're not doing it necessarily for just yourself. It's for other people. It's because there's nothing more great than serving people and serving them rightly. You know, Jesus Christ said that there's no better thing than to lay down your life for another. You know, and you think about how all of the most respected things was servicemen, and you are one like that now. You are an oath keeper, because you are out there taking a stand and doing what our forefathers did, not taking what they tell you to oppose tyranny. And I think that you are doing a very good service to your country. Stewart, what do you think?
Well, Robert, we're proud to have him as a member of Oath Keepers. And as I told him a little while ago before we got on with you, I'm going to designate him as a lifetime Oath Keeper. And I'm not going to say we're going to comp him a lifetime membership, because he earned it. He's earning it right now. So we're honored to have him as a member of Oath Keepers. And he showed up in Virginia and, you know, put his boots where his convictions are, and he's doing it again right now. So we, like I said before, we have to make sure that we support him fully. Whatever comes in the future, you know, we're going to be there right with him. And if it comes down to, if he has to wind up going to court, we're going to support him in doing that. We'll help raise money for him, and we'll show up at as what we have to do. And knock on wood, hopefully Cuomo backs off and realizes he can't win, especially if more New York business owners step up. But Robert, you've got some support in your local community, right? Who's coming out there to support you so far?
Well, we have a few other local businesses. Some of them, one of them a mobile barbershop. He said he's going to come in Defiance as well and actually provide hair cutting services in front of the shop where I am. Also, we have Omari Shakur, who's a local official, government official, and he has been very defiant towards the law enforcement. He's got a long history. His son was actually killed by the police in the city of Newburgh, where I am. There's more to the story than that, but there was once he became involved and said he'd be attending the rally, we wanted to make sure it was for the right reasons. So actually last night they were holding a peaceful protest in regards to this matter in Minneapolis there, and I was speaking with Mr. Rhodes, and we decided that I should go and confirm that the people being brought out are there for the right reasons, and they're not going to be coming to my event and causing possible, violence. So it was incredibly peaceful. He was actually spreading a message of unity among all people and finding a way to work together with law enforcement and to stop all this violence. So, and then there's a lot of patriotic people. I have many that would be considered themselves 3%, that are showing up there, and a lot of law enforcement. I've had an overwhelming amount of support from local law enforcement. People I've never met before have seen some of my interviews on the media and called the shop and said, hey, I just saw you on wherever. I just want to let you know that really respect what you're doing, and I stand behind you. And that gives me it makes me feel okay, doing what I'm doing, to hear it on that level. So
that's really good. I don't know if you said it earlier. Are you able to perhaps tell the name of your business?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And then your address, and any way that anybody who wants to join you on this can probably contact you beforehand. I know you're going to be pretty busy getting ready for this, but it would be very helpful to everybody around there to hear the information on that.
Sure. Well, the name is a little different. It's in Italian. It's Casa di Dolore, Casadidolore, and it means House of Pain in Italian. The address is 784 Broadway, Newburgh, New York, 12550. And we will be there Saturday the 30th at 9 a.m., and we will keep it going until they shut us down or till it's time to go, take a break, get some dinner or something. So.
Well, that's pretty cool. Pretty cool. I really appreciate what you're doing, and we're going to go ahead into a little bit more talking here, but you guys need to be there and stand with this man and continue to support him. You're doing a very outstanding job. Thank you very much for doing. I'm very proud of you.
It really is my pleasure, and I find it to be the bare minimum, for someone that's patriotic. And if you consider yourself a 3%er, you're labeling yourself as someone that's ready to take the ultimate stand when the time comes. So if you're not willing to take the stand when we're here and this is the final peaceful battle, then you're proving yourself to be not what you represent, in my view. No offense to anyone, but it's time to stand up politically.
I completely agree. Thank you very much, Roberto.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Well, in closing, let's go ahead, Stewart, and give any closing thoughts that you might have about the Minneapolis issue and what might possibly be spreading the nation as they might comment what's going on there. What your final thoughts on this? Your final thoughts on what could possibly be coming on that, and any issues that needs to be addressed?
Well, the American people are being divided along racial lines in particular, but also political lines. And there are people who don't have our best interest in mind, that want chaos. And they think that chaos creates opportunity for them to reshape our society as they see fit. So just watch out for people like that who want to create more violence and more, especially more racial contest, angst and discord in this country. So to me, this is not a racial issue. It's a police power and lack of accountability issue. It's the bad cops not being controlled, not being purged out of places. It's the standards not being where they need to be, training, but also in enforcing that training and enforcing our laws. And so where police do wrong, as we've seen many, many times, they need to be prosecuted, they need to be convicted. And the police officers that are the good police officers need to be supported and promoted for turning in, exposing bad police officers. They should not be ostracized like Superco was. That is a cultural problem within the police ranks that needs to be fixed. And I was talking to John Shirley, a 20-year police officer from Houston PD, and we were talking today about that there needs to be a changing of the culture in the police culture, and a correction of where it's gone wrong. The militarization of the police, the overzealous use of SWAT teams to give just everyday search warrants, just the mindset that's been instilled in police officers that everyone's potential dirtbag, everyone's potential drug dealer, and the war on drugs has been a disaster. It's been a war on our Constitution. And so all of this combined has led to a situation where police now are behaving like an occupying army rather than behaving like police, like peace officers. And I think that one of the big things that has to be pushed is a throwback to the beat cop who knew everybody in the community, who walked the neighborhood, and everyone knew him, and he knew exactly what was going on because he was right there on the street with the people, not running around in his cruiser with the windows locked and rolled up, and with the air on. So he was out there with the people. And that's what it's going to take, is a return to that kind of actual community policing, I believe. And, I think Governor Cuomo is going to probably be coming on your show at one point, and he can talk about what he thinks is necessary. He grew up in inner city neighborhoods in Minneapolis. He'd be a good guest to have on and talk about the realities in those communities and what he thinks needs to be done in those particular communities to correct this increased hostility between the people and the police in those communities. It's a real problem. So I think it'd be great to have him on as a guest for you. I'll encourage that.
Absolutely. We will have to look into that. Roberto, do you have any closing thoughts that you might think about anything that was said tonight, or any closing thoughts that you might want to go out and let the people of Southgate know?
Yes, the division, I think that's one of the most core issues in this country. They've found so many ways to divide us so effectively that we struggle coming together, and the foundation is we the people, as united. That's our power. And if we don't have the ability to find a way to circumvent all these divisive, the rhetoric that they create, then we're going to struggle to regain the unity and the freedom in this country. So I really encourage people to set that aside and work together towards what this country was founded on, and it's those documents and freedom and collectively being a unit.
And on that, I'll add something to that. So I'm glad to see that this local councilman is going to be there, Mr. Shakur. What's his last name?
Yes, Shakur.
Right, Shakur. So I'm looking forward to meeting him, and that's what's needed. You got to reach across political lines. And definitely across racial lines in these communities. And we all have a common interest in preserving our individual rights that are supposed to be protected by our Constitution and stopping abuse of those rights. We should all have that common ground. So, and I hope there'll be other local officials that are there. It would be kind of ironic if the only one who's there is a local Democrat, right? And don't show their face. I'll tell you from my recent experience here in Texas, don't be surprised if the Republicans don't show up.
Oh, man.
It's extremely disappointing. I've been a lifelong Republican, and I've seen nothing but horrendous behavior, not by all, but some stand-up people here in Texas, but by all too many. I'll say that.
Yeah, it's been very surprising about how everything's gone, hasn't it?
Yeah, you're going to find out who really cares about your rights and who really doesn't. And it doesn't always break down along party lines. In fact, it usually does not.
Yeah, and we've seen that because somebody says they're conservative or libertarian or liberal doesn't necessarily mean that they work those titles the way they're intended. And you see clearly who is on your side. You are absolutely correct about that, Stewart, and you're absolutely correct with what you said too, Roberto. Guys, gentlemen, I am very appreciative, Stewart and Roberto, that you came on to Battlefront Southgate. Thank you for coming on this show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Indeed. Thank you.
God bless.
God bless. And
bless.
All of you need to remember that your rights are only going to be upheld if you are willing to get out there and stand up for them. When you lay down, if you've been beat up and told what to do, and someone cuts you open and you spill out all of your guts, and you're just laying there wounded, and you refuse to get up, you know what you are at that point? Gutless. You need to get up and make a stand. You can do this. You have people who will support you, and you may be the very person who motivates everyone out there to fight back. You could be Oliver Cromwell. You could be all of these great leaders in the past who made stances. With all of that said, everybody stand strong, defend liberty, and uphold your oaths, representatives. Southgate out.